Hey guys, it's Art from the Art and Bree channel. We've been out here on this piece of land for 5 years now, and we've been working really hard to improve our garden every year with actually great success. So today, it's the first day of fall by the weather, not by the calendar. It's chilly, it's cold, it's beautiful. I'm going to take you on a tour of our very messy garden that was extremely productive this last year. I'm going to show you all the things that are still producing, and then talk to you about the work that we have to do to put this garden to bed for the winter. Our blueberries out here are looking really good. I'm making this video, most of our videos are very edited, but I'm making this video because I'm way behind on editing and said, hey, let's stay connected and make a garden tour. Some of this is going to be a mess. We're going to start with the mess and we'll move to the stuff that's beautiful. Here's a mess. This was a giant onion bed, a carrot, radish, etc. bed, and cabbage and broccoli. We got so much cabbage and broccoli out of here this year, it was mind-blowing. And we made gallons and gallons of sauerkraut. We froze many gallon bags of broccoli, and now it's grown up in weeds, which is not ideal. I was out here with a friend the other day though. The fact that there's this many weeds is terrible, but I was telling my friend, this is actually better in my view with a long-term garden plan. This is better than bare soil because these weeds will benefit the soil in the same way that a cover crop does. And look at the volume we have compared to almost any cover crop that you could possibly put on here. A massive volume. I'll show you on this bed. We've pulled the weeds out and piled them on the bed, and this is already rotted down a lot, and it is a good 12 inches on the center of the bed. That's what we're doing with all these weeds. We're pulling them out, we're piling them, and we'll end up tarping these areas with a large opaque impermeable tarp which will kill all the weeds. The challenge of this is that some of these weeds are going to seed, like this beautiful lamb's quarter here. It's an edible weed, and those seeds will come back to haunt us next year. But just with tarping and progressive mulching, I think we can keep moving this towards being more weed free. But in the context of this level of weed pressure, we had massive harvests out of these beds through tarping early, getting rid of most of the weeds early. I'm going to show you, there's a few cabbages that are still up in here that I'm going to pull out and make sauerkraut. And the cabbage is fine out in the garden. It's actually superior to pulling it and putting it in a fridge because until it freezes, it'll last out here with its roots in the ground. This bed here, let me find you a beautiful one. This bed still has a bunch of cabbage. The outer leaves on this are a mess, but once you peel off about 3 or 4 layers right there, you have a beautiful huge head of cabbage. And there are about 8 more in here that will turn into sauerkraut in the next few weeks. I brought that same friend up here to the garden actually. He said he'd never made sauerkraut. He was over here for my son's birthday, and I said, hey, let's make sauerkraut right now. I want to show you how easy it is. This is something I'm really passionate about. So we ran up to the garden, we cut 4 heads of sauerkraut, we took 2 of them, and in about 15 minutes we had 3 half-gallon jars of sauerkraut ready to ferment. I sent those home with him and instructed him to put 1 in the fridge week 1, that would be his kind of fresh batch, and keep 1 out for 2 weeks, and then keep 1 out for like a month or 2 months, and so he can catch that whole range. And that was so much fun, being able to run to the garden, and he got a kick out of it and learned a lot. Next we come to the tomatoes. Now our tomatoes were as successful as they've ever been this year. They've been hit pretty hard by the blight late this summer, but they're still actually, we're still picking them regularly, and the plants aren't totally dead yet, and some of these greenies will still actually ripen into beautiful ripe tomatoes. And there's actually a lot that need picking right now. I just love picking tomatoes and eating them straight from the garden. Just like that. The flavor is enormous. It's so much superior to a tomato you can get in any store. The next thing I'm going to show you here is part of our plan for productivity next year. This manure pile is covered with weeds right now, which is fine. We'll end up just pulling a tarp over it and basically tarping the weeds off there. And then as we shut these beds down for the winter, we're going to start taking this massive manure pile, which has shrunk considerably, and running it on the beds, throwing it on the beds. We're going to spread this over about 20 beds, and it'll just be a thin layer, but it should be enough to make up for anything that we've lost this year that came out as we grew vegetables and as we pulled harvests out of the garden. And actually, we should have more productive beds next year because that volume of manure is greater than anything that we've ever put up here. Here we have a collection of weedy, messy beds. These were potatoes, again overgrown with accidental cover crops. And what we'll do here is probably I'll weed eat them down and tarp over them. And after I weed eat, I'll rake the debris from weed eating just back up on top of the beds. I want to keep as much of that plant matter on these beds because that will contribute significantly to next year. And then these are heavily mulched between with wood chips. So by next spring, we actually should have really, really good looking beds up here. Here's a whole patch of out of control nasturtiums. If you've never eaten nasturtium flowers, they're spicy and delicious. Now here's another big success I want to show you is our peppers. We've had actually kind of poor luck with peppers in the past. Our region is not the best for growing them, but look at this plant right here. These actually need to be harvested. Look at that plant, just covered with these beautiful red bell peppers. And then further down, here's what I'm excited about. I'm excited about the hot peppers. And if we can get just a couple more weeks till we have our first freeze, we'll be good on these. Here's jalapenos, and then down here are some chili peppers. And if we can get a couple weeks, we'll have a huge batch of perfectly ripe red chili peppers. And I'm gonna try to put all of them into pepper sauce because I can't get enough pepper sauce in my life. And I've made pepper sauce that I was just as happy with as anything I've gotten from the store. Anna and I, my sister, we made a fermented pepper sauce the other day with a smoked, no, we did the jalapenos with smoked salt, but you can use a smoked salt when you make your pepper sauce and add that really beautiful flavor. So I'm gonna stick that in my pocket and take that to the camper. This looks like a mess, and it is, but again, this was actually kind of a moderate success up here. I'm not entirely sure why. I think it was our soil, but we grew really small squash this year. Here's a butternut squash. It's a mini. There's a lot of them, and we'll come up and we have a couple jobs we have to do before our first freeze. So we're going to be watching the weather really closely. Picking the peppers is a job that has to be done before the first freeze. Pulling all of these squash out and putting them in a place they can't freeze. It will really be the only way to prevent them from being ruined. And then here's another one. Before a hard freeze, we need to get all these sweet potatoes out of the ground. But we want to let them go as long as possible because they take a long season to grow. They have completely taken over this area, and there are 4 beds. So that's actually a pretty big job that will squeeze in somewhere. In the meantime though, we can enjoy the greens and the sweet potatoes. I don't eat too many of them raw. They have that same phytic acid that spinach can have. So I try to limit my raw consumption, but they're delicious steamed, or my favorite is sauteed, like in a stir fry. We'll even eat them, greens like that for breakfast. Now over here, really cool, and I didn't expect this. I didn't expect this big of a harvest. There are raspberries to be picked daily. And so that's a sweet treat. And actually, it was a surprise for me, never having had raspberries to harvest here. I didn't know what a nice crop we could get on the new vines that grew this year. In fact, there's raspberry plants that I pulled out just months ago as suckers and planted them up along the top there, and some of those have even fruited for us, which is incredible. Our corn is all on the ground, and I'm going to just compost all those corn stalks, probably on the beds. I think that'll work. If I get them in soil contact, they'll rot down enough. The challenge when you're composting really heavy materials, like a corn stalk, which is very woody, is that if you're not careful, you'll have a lot of debris left after a winter compost session. I think if I get them actually on the soil where they have constant moisture though, they'll break down enough. I may yet actually put them in a pile, and so that I can give them a longer period. But all of these beds will have manure on them, and then they'll all be tarped. Probably immediately, and then again before we plant in the spring. Here's the kids' garden. Guys, kids and gardening, there's not a better combination. And their garden was the most weedy section for the duration of the summer. We helped them some, but we also want to give them some autonomy in it. And they kind of let it go. But I will tell you, this little patch right here, this is Brighton's garden, and he got such a kick out of having a garden this year. And there's actually still stuff in here. There's some volunteer cherry tomatoes. We didn't actually plant these, and that was a really pleasant surprise. Let me get one that's good. Here's one. And there's still beautiful kale in there. There's actually some carrots that he needs to pull out. Next, I'm going to take you into the section of garden that is our current winter garden that we've actually been working in. And that is right here. On this end we have a bunch of cilantro, and I think that's lettuce, yeah, lettuces, collards, spinach. And those were all started, well, not the lettuce, but most of them were started from plant starts. And we've had great success with it. In fact, this kale, which we planted early in the spring, we started from starts, and look at it. It looks as good as it's looked all summer long. It's still producing, and I expect this kale that we planted, when did we plant it? In April, I think. I expect this kale to be harvestable through the winter, and we'll probably get one more run of it early spring before we tear it out. After that, it's kind of just too long, and it's worth tearing it out. But I expect to actually be picking off these kale plants for a full year, because in the spring, you know, we'll come through the winter and pick them, and they won't grow a lot because the days are short. We'll pick them, we'll eat them, but in the spring, a full year after we planted them, they'll come back to life as the days get longer, and we'll be able to pick off of them again. That's one of my favorite things about kale. You can get more duration from greens like these than pretty much any other plant that you manage kind of as an annual. Basically, you plant it and then you get rid of the plants altogether. Here's some beautiful Swiss chard. The same is true of the Swiss chard. It does seem to get a little more beat down by the cold weather in my memory, but we'll be harvesting on that straight into the next months. And the kale, we've harvested kale out of snow with no covering. You just go pull it out of the snow. It's delicious. In fact, it's better in the snow. This next bed, here's something funny. I've never claimed to be a gardening expert, but I made a kind of a goofy mistake. This next bed is Swiss chard, that's easy, and beets. But when I planted it and made a video about it, I said it was all Swiss chard. I was like, here's 2 different varieties of Swiss chard. And I know there were folks who watched my video who knew that it was beets because it had red roots. And after I made the video, Brianna said, those were beets. And I said, oh, that makes sense, that beets would have red roots. So Swiss chard and beets in this bed. This bed is all kale. We like kale, and we want to get this bed, hopefully this bed will grow up enough before the days get short that we can harvest out of this bed through the winter as well. The remainder of the garden here below is actually not our winter garden. It's strawberries, which need weeding and mulching. They've been weeded and the weeds come back, and then a massive patch of comfrey. And comfrey is one of those plants I have mixed feelings on. Now you look at this and you think everything they say about comfrey is true, okay? It mines minerals out of the soil below. You can use it for green manure, kind of a chop and drop. What I'm doing right here is just tearing the tops off of these plants and turning the tops of these plants into mulch. And I've done this to these plants at least 6 times this year, and they still come back just in a massive, massive regrowth. They're beautiful and green, incredibly lush. This may be their last big regrowth actually, because once it freezes, the leaves won't. The leaves get all black and mushy. And then here's another big patch here. I'll tear that down and just turn this all into green manure. This is a cool success though, because I had just, I think 2 plants, and early this year I took root cuttings. I just tore them out and I spaced them along down here, and now there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 big comfrey plants. I don't really ever worry about comfrey getting out of control because it's just like another weed. and the other thing about it is if you dig up the roots several times, you can remove the majority of it. So even though it's taken over this path row here, I'm actually very much okay with it, and I like to keep it there so I can take it and put it in other places. Now, here's why I have some mixed feelings on comfrey, because I've put comfrey in other places. I'll go show you one of them. And when I put it in other places, it's not done that well. It doesn't produce massive greenery for green manure unless the soil is rich, period. So I've put it in 3 or 4 other places, and it just didn't do that great. So it makes me think, well, if you have to have rich soil to grow a bunch of green manure, is that even an advantage? Now, it still may have some really good mineral mining capabilities, potential for animal feed, so I haven't given up on it entirely, but it's not suited for everywhere, and that's just a fact. I'll show you one of them down here that actually did good. I put in comfrey all along this fence line, and they actually sprouted up and did okay, and then they just never got big because the soil fertility is not as high as it is in that lower section of the garden. There's one spot here that it did well. I'll show you that. This spot it did well, and I've chopped and dropped this actually just like last week. This is the only spot though I've put it. Nope, this is one of 2 spots that I put it in the yard, and I've put out several hundred root cuttings, and most of them sprouted. This is one of 2 spots where it actually did well. Everywhere else it's been just so-so, or it's grown, lived a little while, and then died down. And so that's just kind of my thoughts on comfrey. Well guys, we're here in the orchard. I won't keep you much longer. It is just an incredibly beautiful fall day. I wanted to throw this video out there just because I'm drowning in editing, working on house projects. I will update you on the house, on what's going on with us. We got some big changes coming that are going to be really good. They're exciting. They'll be challenging in their own right, but I just wanted to throw this video out. Unedited. It's probably one of 5 or 6 videos that we have out of 800 or so that's unedited to show you the garden and what's going on this beautiful first day of fall, I'm calling it. You'll have a great day. We'll see you in a video tomorrow, normal video. Bye.